There we go. All right. So we're back at Charlene Gonzalez. So her top tip is to honor the process and honor the timeline. And Charlene, did you raise your hand? Go ahead and raise your hand. Just let everybody know that I know they can read your name, but go ahead and just raise your hand. Thanks. All right, next we have Amy Croucher, and she's been with the state for 25 years. And Amy, I don't see on there what agency you're with. Go ahead and take.
I'm with the Department of Justice.
Okay.
So I've
great.
been 25 years with DOJ and the state.
Perfect. Thank you. Her role is project librarian, responsible for finalizing documents, monitoring deliverable reviews, and directing staff to appropriate libraries to find information. The type of deliverable that she works on is a IT deliverable. And her top tip is have a clear deliverable management plan and follow the plan. Great. Thanks, Amy. Appreciate that. Next, we have Donald. And Donald, if you can raise your hand, it'd be great. He's been with the state for 32 years and 20 years with Department of Corrections. The role that he plays is to ensure project governance and use of methodology. And the type of deliverable is IT deliverable. And his top tip is stakeholder engagement. Wonderful. Glad you're here. Next, we have Tracy. If you could raise your hand, it'd be great. She's been with the state for 26 years and at the Department of Corrections. Her role is real property management projects. And the deliverable is facilities deliverable. It's great to not just all be around IT deliverables. So thank you for being here. And then her top tip is avoid scope creep as much as possible. And last, we have Jessica. Jessica, if you could raise your hand as well. And she's been with the state for 3 years at OIS. And her role is project delivery manager in IT deliverables. And her top tip is implement appropriate tools and processes in the project planning phase as the deliverable review process serves as quality review between the deliverable and the client. All right, welcome. Glad you're here. All right, so the way this is going to lay out is we have predetermined questions that we're going to ask the panel and give them the opportunity to answer and give feedback and share with the group. And if you have any questions for the panel or something comes up, feel free to put it in the chat and then we'll just continue the discussion as we go along. So our first question for the panel is, how do you bring up the discussion of project deliverables? And then if we want to expand on that, we can always go into, well, what worked well in bringing up the discussion and what were some of the struggles bringing up the discussion of deliverables. So for those on the panel that would like to share, go ahead and raise your hand. I know we're all camera shy. Perlene, would you be willing to share first off?
Amy Croucher has her hand up.
Sorry. I didn't see your hand. Sorry. Go ahead, Amy.
Hi. So I formed my responses based on what worked well and what did not go well. For this one, it worked well to make the deliverable approval process part of the contract and the steps for deliverable approval part of the project plan. So that was really helpful.
Great, thank you. Would anybody else on the panel like to share as well? All right. Amy, would you like to expand on anything that worked well in that as you were doing that, or maybe a struggle that you had during doing that?
The fact that deliverable approval was part of the built into the whole project, that really just worked really well. That's really all I had to share. I think Donald has his hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Donald.
Yeah, we have made it part of our project methodology that are expected deliverables and from the various phases of a project. And so it makes it pretty easy to go in and have that discussion with the users. As a lot of times, they're repeat offenders on projects. So they start to understand what deliverables we're going to have to do when becomes pretty easy as they get more familiar with the process. And all of our PMs can plan around the deliverables that they need to do, and we have templates and all of that. So just anything that makes it easier to create them, the more likely we are to get good quality deliverables from them.
Great, sounds good. Thanks, and thanks for your comment, Jessica. I appreciate that. All right, our next question is, how do you version your deliverables? Is there a specific type of naming nomenclature that you use when you do your deliverables, or do you just create a new document every time? Go ahead.
Hey, it's Jessica. Yeah, so we version our deliverables where we start with a V1.0 and then we go up to a V1.4 in a sense. So once we get to like a V1.3, we're gonna suggest the deliverable owner and the creator of the deliverable and then the commenters sit down and have a discussion to kind of get those mitigated and agreed upon so we can get that deliverable approved in a timely manner. You typically don't want it to go more than a V1. 1.3 in a sense, and then we structure our DEDs version our DEDs a little bit differently. However, we'll start at the 0.4. However, I personally like just having both the DED and the deliverable start with the 1.0, just to keep it simple for everybody.
All right, thanks. Does anybody else do their versioning any different?
Charlene has her hand up.
Oh, sorry. I'm just not seeing. There, I see your hand now. Thanks.
Okay.
Go ahead, Shirley.
So ours is just a little bit different in that in the drafting phases, we have a 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and then the approved version would be a 1.0. And then these are deliverables more on the internal side, because if you have a cycle for versioning, then when you're looking at updating, it would be a 1.1, 1.2, and then the next approved version would be a 2.0. And which I think, doesn't work any better than what Jessica described. I think the key is that you have a defined versioning mechanism, I think is what's key.
Good point.
Yeah. And I can add to that too a little bit, depending, and because you said the internal deliverables and that kind of stuff. It's also depending on how many vendors we have too, and which vendors prefer, the versioning. Obviously, we want everybody to be on the same page. But if we do have like a vendor that wants to use the 0.4 to the 1.0, we would do that too and customize it however we needed to.
Great. Thank you for sharing. All right, next question. How do you know your deliverables have been met?
Jessica has her hand up.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of piggybacking off what I just said, going to the V1.3, we know deliverables have met when the project's resources have reviewed and approved the deliverable document. So in the comment log, we'll have either all agrees, or some, it'll say disagree or partially agree and that kind of thing. But once it's all agree, I know that indicates I'll have the state track lead or whoever the lead is, I'll have them review, give me the final thumbs up, and we'll move forward from there. With the approval process. So it's usually making sure everybody has the agree upon, and there is quality there too as well in the deliverable.
Great. So I'm not seeing the hands, so just forget about the hands and go ahead and share if you want to share. That'd be great. I do have a question though. So if you're doing a project where there's multiple steps or sprints, do you manage the deliverables differently? And how do you measure those deliverables in those different sprints? Does that make sense?
Can you repeat it again, Douglas?
So if you have a project where there's multiple times where you might have different deliverables rather than at the very end, how do you measure those deliverables in those different phases?
This is Tony from ODOT. So one of the things that we do, for example, is if we're, say, our test cases. So we have a testing document, test case document, and for each one of the deployed pieces of a software, we have one project where we're deploying 3 different parts of the tool. As we deploy each one of those, there will be different versions of the test cases that will go through the process and will get approved for that specific one, but we're not going to eliminate the old one, because when we get to the end and we're deploying the final one, we're going to have tested the first deployment 2 other times. So it's going to get the testing is going to have to continue. So we're going to have versions at each one of those deployments, or each one of those phases within the project. That's how we usually control it, is that we'll have a version for each one of them.
Great.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it.
This is Tracy from DOC, and I'd just like to add that also when it's not an IT project and you have different deliverables that are due, halfway, and there's dependencies, you can't complete the last one until the first one is done. Stakeholder engagement, lots of communication and feedback from those involved, and to make sure that it is what was expected.
Great. Thanks, Tracy, for sharing. All right, next question. How early do you require the deliverable expectation document be submitted prior to the due date of the deliverable? And does everyone use a DED document? Anybody from the panel like to share?
So this is Charlene. I'll share. So I'd say we encourage DEDs as often as we can get them negotiated into contracts. And a typical time frame I've seen is 10 days, 10 business days prior to the delivery of the deliverable. And I would say that that often is not enough time, because ideally they've already started their work, and then if there's major dialogue about components needed, then it doesn't give them a lot of time to shore it up. But a lot of that is dependent upon the entire time frame of the contract. So we try and get them as early as we can. We encourage them to submit early as well.
Great.
Yeah, I would agree. The earlier, the better. Obviously, working on the one project, we had thousands of deliverables that were coming in. Sorry, it was 500 plus deliverables coming in. So I would expect the DED anywhere between 2 months, and no less than a month before the deliverable drop, just to make sure we had time to get it approved and stuff like that. It definitely has a shorter review cycle though, and a shorter versioning on it for sure. So the DED.
Thanks. Does anybody have anything to share about some struggles that they've had with getting DEDs completed or filled out?
Yeah, this is Jessica. I can kind of I've had a few struggles with DEDs. And mainly what it's around is additional scope that they're wanting to see in that deliverable, but it might be covered in a deliverable down the road. So just having to constantly go back to the contract and look to see, hey, are we going to cover this somewhere else in a different deliverable? Does it need to be in this DED? You know, that type of thing. So that's probably been the biggest struggle, is constantly, you know, back and forth checking to make sure that it's not going to be covered in a different deliverable.
Some struggles I've seen are that while I highly encourage DEDs, they're not foolproof. So oftentimes they're still just a skeleton structure with the, I always wish I can remember the Latin phrase, the ipsum lorem ipsum, somebody knows what it actually is. But we have some vendors that are actually will ask us if in lieu of a DED they can submit a prior product or a sample of a product, redacted with, you know, sensitive information if there was any. And that's actually really, really helpful. So I don't typically turn that down if that's a request from the vendor, because it's fuller. It gives you a better sense of that you're going to get everything that you want from the final deliverable.
Great. Thank you for sharing. All right. Next question we have is, what tool do you use for tracking deliverables?
This is Amy. We used Microsoft Project to do the official tracking of deliverable reviews and approval. We also used a Excel spreadsheet to reflect the deliverable review team members and major deliverable dates to share with team members who were not familiar with Microsoft Project, just to make it easier for staff to understand when deliverables were due and when their timeframes were due. It was sometimes a struggle when changes were made to the schedule and it wasn't reflected in the Excel tracking document. So it was definitely important to keep them in sync, because they could fall out of sync otherwise.
All right, thank you.
This is Jessica, and I've had the exact same experience as Amy has. So using Microsoft Project and then the Excel, and just like she said, there is a struggle with keeping them in sync for sure.
Okay. There's a tool out there called Smartsheet, and Tracy shared a link with me earlier, and I know at ODOT we've used Smartsheet before. Has any other agencies or individuals used Smartsheet or a different type of tool?
This is Amy. Our agency is beginning to use Smartsheet more often. Currently, we're using it to track change request executions. So the processes that are required to implement a change request, we're tracking those in Smartsheet and the tasks for those.
Dawn at DOC, and we have smart sheets. We're using it right now to set up an intake process for a request coming in from the business into IT. But we're also going to branch into delivery tracking and stuff as well, deliverable tracking as well.
Oh, great. Great. Thanks.
This is Charlene. We use two products much like Amy and Jessica. So we have tracking of the timelines in Microsoft Project, and then we have the Excel spreadsheet as well. And I just want to highlight that setting that up, you know, once you have your statement of work and you know what the deliverables are, setting that up, identifying those reviewers is so helpful when it comes time that you receive the deliverable and you're not questioning or second guessing or missing somebody on a distribution because you've already outlined that ahead of time. The other pieces that we have in addition in that Excel sheet are a few columns towards the end that help with managing the invoice receipt and processing of the invoice, so that we're seeing the receipt of the deliverable and then payment. It helps mitigate that we are getting the invoices timely, processing them timely, and not duplicate payments. Those risks are somewhat mitigated.
Great. Thanks, Charlene. All right. Another question that we have is, how often do you review the deliverables?
So this is Amy. We had identified certain deliverables where we would review them periodically throughout the project, like the implementation plan and schedule, in which we reviewed that semi-annually, and that seemed to work well. And then when we identified it needs for changes to deliverables or documents, we would follow either the change request process for those, or we had a clarification process in which we didn't require a formal change request. It was just really to bring the documentation into sync with current practices. So that those seem to work well for us. And it was sometimes a struggle to set aside time for review of those deliverables when the project is in full swing. So we really had to set scheduled times for those reviews and make the changes as necessary.
Thanks for sharing.
Hey, this is Jessica. So we're reviewing deliverables pretty much on a daily basis because of the way our review cycle started out. However, with the project I'm currently on, since we are an ONN, I'm only getting like 4 to 6 deliverables a month, which is much better than getting 4 to 6, every 2 days, during the one project, the height of the one project. So it all depends on the review cycle. So whether it be a longer review cycle of 10 days or a shorter of 5 days, where typically that's how often we're reviewing the deliverables. And like Amy said, we'll go back and some of the bigger ones like the plan and stuff, we'll update those as the time goes along.
Thanks.
This is Tracy, and I'm reviewing deliverables right now every 2 weeks, and then starting the first week of August, because we're down to kind of running out of time, we're going to move to weekly review of deliverables. So.
Okay. Again, anything that worked well in the process, or anything that you want to share about some struggles that you might have had in reviewing with the deliverables?
This is Tracy again, and I think just honest, transparent communication, often helps move things along, making sure everybody is on the same page, and communicating. Can never communicate too much, so that always works well.
Great. And so Ben put in the chat there, he says, I always find the first deliverable review, especially if they are written documents, to be difficult and time consuming. Yes. As you're trying to set the standard for what the deliverables should include. Thanks for sharing, Ben. Anybody else in the attending like to share about when they reviewed deliverables, or something that worked well, something that was a struggle? All right. So our next question is, what do you do when there's a gap between the way the deliverable was written and what was delivered? Not like that ever happened.
Angela has a comment in the comments.
Yeah, so Angela says, having a checklist for content in the DED is very helpful for review. Thank you for sharing, Angela. Good point.
This is Amy. It seemed to work well to either reject the deliverable up front or hold meetings to discuss them further. So if we had rejected a deliverable and it wasn't clear why we rejected a deliverable, we would hold the meeting with the contractor to discuss what we're seeing are the gaps and what can be improved upon, and then come up with a target date for a revised deliverable. So, and then we would revise our review timeframes based on that. So that seemed to work well for us. And like someone said before, open, clear communication is so important.
I would agree.
Don at DOC, I know for us, I mean, we have templates for our internal PMs and business analysts to use for creating project deliverables. And if they stray from that on a given deliverable, then typically as I review or manager reviews, then we would then delve into why they did it different than what the template was. And maybe they had a valid reason based on the nature of the project that they're doing. Or they just took a little license with the template. Either way, you know, we'll have a discussion about it and decide on whether the deliverable can go forward as it is, or if we'd like to have it changed. So.
Thanks, Donald. Sharon.
This is Charlene. What I would offer is that we almost always have feedback. And we have a formal feedback process, and oftentimes it's minor feedback that a comment log will accommodate. But if it's significant that they really missed the mark, then it's a conversation. And the other thing is that we really only want one review cycle. We want one resubmission, not multiples. And so we really coach the vendor strongly that if there's something in our comment log they don't understand, we don't want the comment log coming back that they didn't understand the comment. We really want a discussion before they resubmit to make sure that all the comments are addressed, because those review cycles and resubmissions, they're time consuming and costly for both the state and the vendor. So to mitigate those and reduce those is important to us.
Very good. Anybody else from the attending that would like to share? Okay, I know it's the afternoon and it's sunny out. All right, so that is all of the predetermined questions that I had. Oh, so Angela just put in there, let's see, Chris put in there, he likes to use the SMART deliverable, specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time related. Great, good point, Chris. And then Angela put in there, when the deliverable is a document, we have started asking for a sample to be delivered when the DED is agreed, so that we can establish expectations early on. Good point, Angela. Great point. So as I was saying, so that's a list. We've gone through our predetermined questions about deliverable and deliverable review. And so really that's where we got lots of time, but it's a open question and answer time now for anybody to ask any questions around deliverables, project management, and we can just have an open dialogue.
Doug, did I miss the question about how do we review deliverables? I think there were a question about that. Did I miss
Yeah,
that?
there was a question about how, yeah, let's see here. Let me go back. How often do you review? What tool for tracking? Oh, I must not have had that in there. But that's a great question, Charlene. So how do you review deliverables?
So I'll offer how we do this on our IQMS contracts is we received the deliverable, and and this is unique. This is not the only way to do it, and it's not the best way for some deliverables, but for this type of engagements, it works well for us. So I'm administering those contracts, and I do an initial review of the deliverable using comments in Word, and then I distribute it to the team for them to add on their comments. When I distribute it to them, I always iterate the instruction to them that the review is to identify factual inaccuracies, because they're always very willing to give editorial comments. And so then I give them a deadline, I take it back, and I filter through those comments and put the factual items that need to be addressed in the comment log. And then I can follow up with the team on any of their editorials that they didn't mark as editorial, but clearly were. And that really helps, I think, the reviewers, because they see my initial comments. They can add to those, or it prompts other questions that they might have, or I can point to them things that I need them to review for accuracy, because I don't have necessarily some of the information to confirm it, or it's not my forte. And then we take that comment log and we pass it on to oversight for them to add their comments, and then we kick it back to the vendor. But I know that's very different from some people, but that method has worked well on those engagements for us.
Great. Thanks for sharing. Amy, well, Katie, I will get to your question, but first of all, Amy, you had a comment there. Would you mind? I'm not sure what question, if it was to the last question.
Yes. It's to the how do you review deliverables, and it's a long process. I thought it would be easier just to paste it into the comments. So basically, our whole process was it worked well to have the review team identified prior to submittal. The contractor would upload the deliverable to SharePoint and notify the agency project management office. Then the project management office would advise the review lead, and the review lead would send an email to the review team with a due date. Usually the due date is 1 or 2 days prior to when the deliverable is due back to the contractor for the review lead to reconcile comments. And then the review lead would notify the PMO when the deliverable was ready to return to the contractor. The PMO returned it to the contractor for revisions, and the contractor would then return it to the PMO. Sometimes the agency and contractor would hold meetings if significant revisions were needed, or the contractor needed to clarify some comments. And the most struggles we had was when, because we use SharePoint and required checkout of documents, and we wouldn't have, parallel reviewers at once. Some review team members couldn't get into the document until one team member was done with it. So we had to set up a process where we would ask whoever's in the document to let us know when they're out of the document, and so on. So that was sometimes challenging, but it worked well for the most part.
Right. Thank you for sharing. All right, so we do have some more questions for the panel and really for the group. It's an open dialogue discussion here. It's from Casey. He's wondering, says, I'm wondering if you have any recommendations when project SMEs or leads are too busy or cannot review deliverables in a timely manner. Anybody want to give a response or share? Well, I know, and I'll just share. I know for ODOT, in the projects that I've worked on, stressing the importance of the deliverable and the need for the deliverable to be reviewed and identified is really key in the process. And if it's a SME or a individual that that is challenging or not having any time where you're not getting any feedback, I've always talked to their manager and go to the individual that is assigning these individuals to the team and ask for help and assistance and input, if that's helpful. All right, and I like that the questions are put in the chat so that they're there for tracking. And speaking of tracking, Ben has a question here. Does the requirements traceability matrix fit in anywhere when you're doing deliverable reviews? Or is that mostly dealt with later when we are testing and doing final acceptance of the system?
Well, it wasn't my area of expertise, but this is Amy, and we did use the requirements traceability matrix to validate requirements, review design documents. We would reference the requirement in the design documents and make sure it all synced up. And whenever we make change requests, we usually have new requirements or update requirements. So it has to follow through the requirements and design process, at least for the information technology process I was on.
Sounds right. Sounds good. Thank you. Angela has a question. How do you approach explaining to agency project leadership the importance of having complete deliverable documents, even when it could cause an impact to the project schedule? She goes on to say, we find this a struggle when working with a vendor that has difficulty with documentation and just wants to focus on delivering the system.
So my response to that is, I mean, clearly dialogue, right? Dialogue with leadership. And then I would leverage the risk management process to address that. If deliverables are incomplete, if deliverables are not timely, I would leverage the risk management process to monitor risks, report risks that highlight the impacts of that and, you know, the probability of how often that's occurring.
All right, thank you. Looks like Donald just responded to Ben saying that Donald's tended to use it for testing acceptance, the matrix, requirement matrix. There's a comment here from Ray that he says, we set up a meeting with all reviewers to walk through the deliverable document to ensure everyone gets time. This way they don't have to set aside time during their day. It's a scheduled time. I like that. That's a good one. Chris Skimmer says, I like to prioritize deliverables whenever possible. All right. Another one from Donald. He usually draws out the timelines for reviews if they do them on their own. I'd rather do it as a group. All right, and then Ed has a comment here. Critical to distinguish clearly between IQMS deliverable reviews and an implementation contractor's project deliverables. Nicely done. Nice. All right. Any other questions from the group?
So,
either
Doug,
the panel or yeah,
Doug,
go ahead, Ed.
This is Ed. I want to make sure that people understand that my comment is it's not just important to distinguish clearly between them. The most important thing is the last sentence, which is managing deliverable review timeframes. a very big critical element of making sure that you don't blow your schedule, or conversely end up having to do multiple contract amendments because you didn't get things done in the right order or in the right time frame. You have to look at that at the very beginning. Say, here's all my IQMS reviews. For if I'm having, you know, quarterly process reviews, build into your schedule. That's going to take, it's going to be delivered 15 days after the beginning of the end of the quarter. You're going to have 5 days to review it. They're going to have 5 days to correct it. You're going to have 5 more days, or whatever the numbers are. And that thing is going to be accepted at some point, because that's a critical element. If it's a QC review of, say, your requirements matrix, your requirements document, you want to have all that stuff done before they finish their requirements document. Because if you don't, if your IQMS folks aren't like giving you good feedback that you can then pass along, or parse and decide what parts you want to pass along to the vendor, you are really gonna, it's gonna be a mess squared. That's what I was trying to say.
Great.
You couldn't see my hands waving because I didn't open my camera.
Thanks for the clarification, Ed. Appreciate it. All right. Any other questions or comments from the group?
So I would just offer a comment to tag on to Ed's remarks, in that sometimes these contracts are executed by different people, and the intersection of them is not well timed until you start putting everything down on paper. And so ideally you have IQMS reviewing vendor deliverables, particular vendor deliverables, and giving you feedback so you can give that feedback to the vendor. But I've often seen where IQMS contracts have longer review periods, vendor contracts have shorter review periods, and they don't always line up. And so just having awareness of that and trying to be aware of that when those contracts are being negotiated, so that you can try and intersect those as effectively as possible is a benefit to a project.
Thank you, Shirley. And I'm going to add one more thing then. Your procurement management plan is critical then. If you know that I'm basing my remarks on 20 years of doing this stuff. If you know that you're going to be required to have an IQMS vendor because you pass a certain threshold, it's a must-have for anything over $5 million. If you know your project's going to cost $8 million, you should have all of your procurement people in the room at the same time. You really have to think about that, because even if there are a couple agencies out there that have procurement authority up to $5 million, and not always are they required to have IQMS. And if they go off and they decide, well, we don't have to go through the formal process, but we want to have these little tidbits of IQMS type activities, and you don't coordinate that with your implementation contractor or your system integration contractor procurement person, I guarantee you're going to have the struggle that Charlene just talked about. Guarantee it. 100% of the projects that didn't coordinate had trouble. Done.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, good points. Anything else around deliverable review from the panel or the group? Any other questions? All right. I'm not hearing anything or seeing anything. So I just want to say thank you to the panel and thank you to the group. Hope that you got a greater understanding of deliverable reviews from our time together. You can look for an email in the next couple of days here, a follow-up email with links to resources that we had here, as well as a link to a survey. We ask that you do complete the survey, because it's going to help us in our future PMUG meetings get a better experience. So with that, I'll say thank you and have a great rest of your week.
Thank
Thanks again for coming.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.